Welcome. I'm Tim Mayo, part of the Festival Organizing Committee. This year's festival is made possible by the generous support of our festival sponsors, Brattleboro Community Television, Jenny Altschuler and Barry Green, Elizabeth Caitlin, the Sapansky Family Trust, the Vermont Humanities Council, and poets and writers. We would also like to thank our advertisers, and we encourage you to support them. Those are the people in that program that you'll see their advertisements. The festival is run entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses. So we encourage you to make a donation at one of the donation boxes sometime over the weekend, or you can use the QR code to donate online through our website, or I think the QR code is also in the program, but we have around here a card, and it has 2 QR codes on it. One QR code is a donation, and the other one is a survey. So we hope that maybe if you find one of these cards, you would also fill out the survey, even if you don't donate. And that way we'll have your opinions about what we did right and what we did wrong. So please take a moment now to turn off the ringer on your cell phone, but feel free to use it to take photos and share them with us on social media, and keep them for yourself too. All right. Pablo Medina was born in Havana, Cuba, and grew up in New York City. He is the author of more than 20 published works, including poetry, fiction, works in translation, and a memoir. Medina is the recipient of numerous honors and awards for his writings and translations, including fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund. He has taught at a number of American colleges and universities, most recently the Warren Wilson MFA program for writers in 2020. Tiger Bark Press published his selected poems, The Foreigner's Song, and his latest poetry collection is Sea of Broken Mirrors, was just published this year by Hanging Loose Press. He divides his time between Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Williamsville, Vermont. In Sea of Broken Mirrors, Pablo Medina writes in the poem Canticle of the Poet. If the poet looked in the mirror, he could see his ears inflamed with the past. In his poem Canticle of the Mirror, he writes, "It isn't in the mirror of today I see myself, or yesterday. It's in the space between time and memory." Then in La Caña de Pescas Poemas, which I'm terrible at reading the Spanish, Medina writes, "The sea means much in my poems. In fact, I would say the sea and other waters metaphorically become the well from which the poet catches his fish, the poems he writes. The mirror is metaphorically broken into smaller shards, read poems, of glass, which each to reflect their own separate visions. Nonetheless, each is also a shard or a piece of the whole mirror, and each shard can only give the poet a partial vision of what he wants to see and express in his poetry. It is only the unbroken mirror which can reflect a complete vision of the world. Broken in the book's title doesn't mean broken as much as it suggests the partial, incomplete, imperfect picture the poet is able to see of a world he perceives to be sacred and thus praises in his canticles or holy songs. So please sing praise and welcome Pablo Medina.
Thank you, Tim, for that wonderful introduction. And I just want to thank the organizers of the festival. It's my second time here. First time I was here for fiction was before the pandemic. So I'm very happy to be here with this book, Sea of Broken Mirrors. I was reading that prose is walking, poetry is flying. Yeah, good old Galway, whom I had the pleasure to meet. But you can reverse that and say poetry is flying, prose is prose is flying, poetry is walking in many ways. And in very rare instances, they come together, as they do in all the great, or my favorite novels anyway. I'm just writing an essay about Juan Rulfo's Pedro Páramo, which is a great novel, very short novel, but one of the great Latin American novels. And so I was reminded that Juan Rulfo's writing is so poetic that you can't tell the difference at times whether you're reading poetry or prose, and I think that happens with a lot of great fiction, you know. Anyway, I'm going to read poetry today. I'm going to begin with an older poem, which goes back to my growing up in the Bronx, where I did from the age of 12 till I went away to college. And so this is called American Food. There's a section, I refer to a section of the Bronx called Spite and Dival, which is that section just north of Manhattan. So there's a reference to it. It means the devil, depending on who you talk to, the devil's spite or the devil's tail. It's Dutch. You may recall that New York was originally a Dutch colony. American food. Once, when I lived in the Bronx, I saw a yellow butterfly float over the train tracks by the Hudson's spiky shore. I went after it, jumping carefully over the third rail all the way to the Harlem River, where the butterfly disappeared into Manhattan. It took me an hour to get home. "You want a tuna fish sandwich?" the old lady who lived down the hall asked, and I said yes. Canned tuna I loved and had plenty over the years, as well as Chef Boyardee ravioli. Now, I am without tuna fish or Boyardee or bologna on white bread with mayo, another delicacy of my youth. "I'm dying," I told that sweet lady in a dream. "What else is new?" she said, and offer a chopped liver sandwich. I bit into it and gagged. I'd never tasted the paste of inner organs. Under the moon, I went down to the street and walked past Spite and Dival and the Bronx, across the river to New Jersey, where I heard a wailing, tender voice spitting out grape after grape of purple angst. American food makes sense if sense is what you look for, and you're hungry from your travel past the devil's spite and the tuna fish, the chopped liver, and the butterfly. So that's an older poem. It's actually in my selected poems, which is also for sale in the back. And I want to read another poem, which is not in Sea of Broken Mirrors. It's actually a newish poem. I wrote it this year. Usually it takes me several years before I'm daring enough to read poems out loud, but this I'll read now. It's called My Teeth in the New Year. No dentist can tell me my teeth are fine. They hurt. They grate and grind, trying to pulverize time. My jaw, stubborn mule, or kicked by one, refused it entry. Unswallowed then, time withdrew, my jaw relaxed, but in it remained a scant memory of bone and sinew, what a beginning is, and how the end comes, slow or sudden like a cat. There may be some ruffling of papers, since when I heard that Leslie couldn't be here because she was sick, I started gathering poems that I might read just to fill out a little bit of the time. And as Tim said, I'll be reading some translations a little bit later on. Since you referred to Canticle of the Poet, I'm going to read that, start with that. Canticle of the Poet. If the poet looked in the mirror, he would see his ears inflamed with the past. He would see thin veins on his cheeks like blue rivers in a distant planet. Mouth of a toad straining to catch the poem just beyond his reach. Almost a smile, almost a dance in and out of the mirror's frame. He will see a mockingbird on a fence post, tail flicking up and down before flying off into memory. He will see his sunken lips like an old general's who has learned to trust defeat. A nose that has lost its shape, sharp bone-cutting air. He will not see his tongue or his elbows stiff and stony. He will see the mole on his forehead. Touch of the woman, his wife would say. Hair tousled, thinned out, anguish and peace, fighting a battle to the end on the dry bed of his intelligence. Many struggles with others, many more with himself. He will see his wife, her closed and dreaming eyes. It was never about the money or the houses or the sex. He will see clouds, an empty parking lot. He wishes he could see the island of his birth, a storm out at sea bringing rain, water gathering in puddles on the road to his childhood home. New pastures. Some of you may know that I live here. What's a Cuban doing in Vermont? Well, that's a subject for another era. I tell people that Cubans in Vermont are more exotic than bears. Nowadays, you see a bear, oh, it's a bear, but a Cuban, oh. Anyway, it's also a love poem. My wife back there is blushing. New pastures. Spring snow falling. I am walking by the river to dispense with city air, stuck to my clothes, trapped in my hair. Some vague need to embrace whatever love has left in me. Spring snow falling, and the field on the far shore glows like blue sheets on which you wrote of moves to new pastures. On that field, birds now, or the memory of birds, black and scattered. I think I should run back to where I found you, an island that insists, as if insistence were the mirror of existence, that water rises every spring as the snow melts me closer to our days together. A lot of the poems in this book are written here, where I found many things about myself I didn't know before. Vermont has been a blessing that way. I think, showed me how we're really, there's no distinction between us and nature. We're just one, and we believe we're going back and forth, but we're just the same. We just delude ourselves into thinking that we aren't. It's called memory loss. I am forgetting something. Is it language? I am forgetting something. My socks? I am forgetting something. Is it remembering? Everything I know stuffed into a plastic bag. There was a trajectory. There was intent to circle back. A letter came, which I read by the window in the dimming light. Memory stropped till it gleamed. Memory split between the smell of ripe guavas and leaves burning on the snow. I was trying reading this poem. I almost decided not to read it, but I'll read it. It still burns a little bit. No pun intended. Okay. After my father's cremation. Outside now, his ashes are blown by the wind through the eyes of 10 needles. He was the poorest man. He was the richest man. He floats with one ear on the horizon and listens to the siren song of the flames, too late to make excuses. His tongue tastes the skin of the sea. His lips are the waves breaking on the beach. I just blew out some air and I picked. Okay. Melancholy baby. Every New Year's is the same. I build things up. I eat bad food. I drink champagne, which I don't like. And then I kiss and wish, and nothing comes. Next day, I rummage through the house and find the manifest of the ship of my destiny. All the passengers are gone or about to go. If I write, the words are clumsy before the desert sea ahead. If I read, I'm soon bored and fall asleep. I wish I had a pet I could feed or stroke, but my last pet died upside down of neglect. My last pet died upside down of neglect. So have all the plants I've ever owned. That line is true. I live with silverfish who eat my books. Plenty of food here till I die. Probably on the couch, waiting while my friends outside bang the door and sing Melancholy Baby and dance away the stars. Huh? My dog is alive and well. That was just the narrator in this poem. I'm very fond of the dog, and my vet keeps telling me, when I take him, he says, this dog keeps getting fatter. So obviously he's not neglected, he's spoiled. You mentioned this poem, La Caña de Pescar Poemas, which it's a poem in English, but it has a Spanish title, roughly meaning the pole for fishing poems. But it was formerly called Climate Change Canticle, and I still try to decide, even though the book is the poem is published already in the book, what title I should go into the grave with. So, La Caña de Pescar Poemas. The sea means much in my poems. So do rivers and the ripples caused by fish swimming against the current. Here in Vermont, the first snow has come, and the birds have already flown south. Not long ago, the skies of the Everglades darkened with flocks, and I saw on electric lines hundreds of kingfishers as I drove the Tamiami Trail. Last winter, I counted 5, which has nothing to do with poetry and a lot to do with climate change. Daily now, I fish facing bare trees and sharp wind. 1 or 2 poems might come, or ideas for poems, or nothing at all. Then I pack up my pole to try another spot and think I'll write prose, which is like trying to land the big redeeming whale. Soon this sun won't be so weak, and the birds that survive will be around all year, snow a primal memory, and the Everglades a watery dream I'll write about instead of fish. I'll read a couple of very brief poems in Spanish. I do write in Spanish, and have published a couple of books in Spanish in Madrid, but I generally leave that for when I travel to Spanish-speaking countries, when the language just surrounds me. Just very briefly, el abejón, which means bumblebee in Spanish. Quisiera abrir el día y lamer el néctar de tus ojos. Quisiera ver qué hacen tus manos cuando estás sola y con deseo. Cómo arreglas la sábana que cae sobre tu cuerpo. Quisiera ser algo que buscaste y solo ahora has encontrado. One more in Spanish. El tiempo en la semilla, luego del río, luego del largo camino, cae la tarde como cae la nieve y cubre la montaña. Cae la tregua sobre los días, cae, ya lo sé, el tiempo en la semilla. I translated some time ago with Mark Stantman, another poet, Garcia Lorca's poet in New York. This happened, we started working on it after 9/11. We had both independently, without knowing each other, had been looking for a book that somehow encapsulated the feeling that we both had when we both witnessed the 9/11, the crash of the planes firsthand. I was teaching at the New School then. And so we were looking for a work of literature that somehow encapsulated that strange feeling of tragedy, defeat, and an apocalypse about to happen. Finally, the only book that really kind of captured it all was Garcia Lorca's Poet in New York, which hadn't been translated for some time. And so we decided, we sort of met and decided, let's try it, let's do it. And we did it. And it was a great experience, but it took us 3 very, very intense years to do it. It was published in 2008 or 2009. Anyway, just to explain to clarify that this poem called Ruin is from a part of the book which he wrote while he was here in Vermont. And not many people know that Garcia Lorca spent 9 days in Vermont. He had met a fellow in Madrid, an American writer and traveler, and they sort of got along, but they went their separate ways. And then Garcia Lorca found himself in New York, and this fellow came down to visit him, and he said, "Why don't you come up to Vermont and spend a few days in my family's cottage in Lake Eden?" I don't know if any of you know where it's up north. Eden Mills is a town by it, and the cottage is still there. We went to visit it on a trip to Montreal. We stopped by the cottage, and there's a little plaque which indicates that Lorca and Philip, I believe was his name, spent 9 days there. Federico, I like to call him that because I felt I grew very close to him after doing the translation, as I do with most people I translate, wanted to expand and deepen the relationship. But Philip was not interested. He was just having fun. Anyway, so this is a poem he wrote in Vermont. And remember, Garcia Lorca was a surrealist, so you have to take that into account when you read it. Ruin. Unknown to itself, a traveler through its own white torso, so went the air. Soon we saw the moon was a horse's skull, and the air a dark apple. Behind the window with whips and lights, we felt the struggle of sand with water. I saw the grasses arrive, and I threw at them a lamb bleeding under their tiny teeth and lancets. In a drop flew the feathers shelled and the celluloid of the first dove. The cloud in a herd remained asleep, contemplating the duel of the rocks with dawn. The grasses come, son. Already their swords of spittle sound in the empty sky. My hand, love, the grasses. Through the broken windows of the house, blood loosens its long hair. You alone and I remain. Prepare your skeleton to greet the air. I alone and you remain. Prepare your skeleton. One must look quickly, love, for our profile without sleep. It's a very different poem from the kind of poem you read when they wrote when he was in New York. You know, he came to New York ostensibly to study Spanish at Columbia University. But it was really to escape a broken love affair. He spent 3 days in London and then took the ship over to New York. He arrived in August, and in October, the stock market crashed. So the book itself, Poet in New York, is a study, his own sort of response to what happened after that Black Tuesday, and so he was witness to it. It was, and the book does feel it very, very strongly. It's, I think, a great book, and probably the best poetry book about the city of New York. Allen Ginsberg said that the Beat Generation would not be possible without Poet in New York. He had read it very closely and felt kinship with Garcia Lorca. I've just signed a contract for the bilingual edition of the selected poems of Rafael Alcides, a Cuban poet who died in 2018. And it's been a very satisfying getting to know his work and translating it. This is a poem called Mercy, which is from a book called Conversations with God. Mercy. Where is this wind coming from? Smelling like prisons and cemeteries, hospital ashes and misery. Who sends it? What does he want from us? Go away, wind of misfortune. Get away from my paintings, my lamps, my papers. Don't rattle my pots and pans. But he doesn't hear or listen. Look, Lord, how he takes the sea from the sea and brings it to my front door. Watch him do and undo the four seasons, the rose of the winds, the reason for harvests, the world's intimate truth, as if he were the sun. Watch him lit up by the lightning flashes as he shears off the roof across the street, then a tree that grew by the sidewalk. Look, there goes a power line followed by two slabs of zinc, turning the killer propellers, ghastly guillotines in search of heads. There are no doors or windows left. To cast off on a rescue boat would be an act of suicide right now. Besides, who would think of rescuing when they themselves need to be rescued? And the sea keeps rising, Lord, and the sky is darkening. Stop, O malevolent wind. Go back, you wicked one. This is the poet's house. Don't underestimate it or awaken the anger of that solitary being who seems so fragile. So there would never be room for forgetting on this earth. God created the poet, don't you forget. And don't forget the poet speaks to God, and God listens. Stop him, O Lord. Don't let the wind complete the disaster. Don't let him destroy the poet's house and leave it adrift in the current like a runaway ship or a clandestine boat. Using rolled up sheets and towels, the poet is already tying himself to his wife and children like a bundle of wheat or tobacco. Under the deafening noise and the groan of the roof, we remain in this town, O Lord, waiting for you, trapped, isolated, without telephone or light. News from the Kingdom. This is also by Rafael Alcides. If you open your mouth, they will force it shut. If you write a line that contradicts him, they'll burn it and tear down your door and throw you behind electrified fences. The king rules the power grid. Unless the crown demands it, you are forbidden to leave the kingdom or even approach the border. In exchange, Lord, you are given the freedom to become a well-fed courtier, even if you're a breeder of pigs. What is required? To applaud and keep applauding as if you had 200,000 hands. This is titled Foreigners. Also, Rafael Alcides. As you see, I'm just taken by his work, and so since I'm working on it right now, I'm just foreigners. They came at dawn with their camels and spent the day setting up tents under sandstorms and sun, carrying water and writing illegible words on a stone that time would turn to sand to feed the storms to come. They drank by the light of a campfire and sang and danced into the night in order to dispel fear. And without leaving any signs or messages for anyone, they left the next dawn with the last star. Where to? We never knew. Where did they come from? We never knew. They left with their camels. I feel obligated to read this poem, which I just finished translating. It's by another Cuban poet, Angel Escobar. I don't know what to say about him. He's, I think, a wonderful poet. Unfortunately, he died very young, at the age of 40. He's in the early 40s. There's a Vermont poet by the name of Christian Dykstra, teaches up in St. Michael's College, who's been translating a lot of him. But this I did myself. The Drowned Man's Plank. A sinking ship always produces survivors, and all survivors are orphans and believe in auguries, superstitions that bloat them with the hope they'll reach the shore, any shore. Caulk another ship and cast off once again in search of another port, and so from port to port until the ship they've cared for casually sinks again. They are as well stubborn. They will build it again. One ship is the same as any other because they are patient and proud and know that they were always survivors, always orphans. They hold their auguries for safekeeping and their superstitions. They don't die of desire or snow or wind or rain. They write their songs and sing them, even while the ship is singing, and keep singing after it reaches the bottom. One can always be a creature of the bottom, not a pistol or book. In every shipwreck, there is a vestige of something. But I am not a survivor. I want to finish with a poem titled The Gift, another Vermont poem. If I can find it, I said there would be ruffling of papers. The Gift. I am a child of the sea, but I've always lived by rivers. They're never the same. When the moon is full, I stop in wonder. When winter comes, I crawl in my cave. I used to love the city, its buildings and clamor. Now I'd rather walk in the woods and bathe in the breath of trees. The watch on my wrist reminds me I will end where I began. Time is a gift unearned. I have a dog named Diego who hates when I leave the house, afraid I'll never return. There is no comforting him. Just now he shook off a thought he didn't like. He learned that trick from me. My wife sings in the morning and tries to get me to dance. Last winter, we ran naked through the falling snow. I feel blessed. There are things I know, and many more I don't. My dearest friends live far away. I long for them as I long for comfortable clothes. My son has become a man. He looks like my father and acts like me sometimes. Day will come when sleep is a seed, and the seed will grow in ways I do not understand. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them or not. I mean, I don't know if I can answer, but I can certainly try.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hearing that you left Cuba when you were 12, it makes sense that just in almost every poem, the sense of longing is, just screaming out.
Right.
And I'm curious how that sense of longing has morphed over the years for you, and what you do with how it changes, or.
Well, what I do, I'll answer the first part. What I do with how it changes is to write poems and let the poems discover for me how that sense of longing is tinged. Longing. It's actually a very good question and almost an impossible question to answer, because I think everybody at some point or other feels a sense of longing. Mine is deeper because, I like to say that I have two births, my actual biological birth and the birth of coming to New York as a 12-year-old boy, and feeling very, very deeply, not intellectually at all, but feeling both the terror of that place and the beauty and excitement of the place. And I'm still trying to reconcile that. At the same time that there's always a kind of a ghost feeling of that sense of longing. What might have happened had my parents not brought me to this country? Who knows? But the longing, you're right, is still there. Yes, it's right.
Thank you very much. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Your own poetry and the translations. And I'm interested, kind of from a craft standpoint, if I don't know if you write poetry in Spanish and in English, depending, or in one language or the other, but you also do so much translation. If you feel that there are linguistic differences between Spanish and English in the context of poetry, and just so you know, I've lived a long time in Latin America. I came the other way of learning Spanish, and I personally find that poems in Spanish resonate with me more than in English, even though I'm a native English speaker. But that's just me. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
People say that, and poems in Spanish resonate with me very deeply. And I carry them with me in my memory, in the ways that they attach themselves, my feelings, my heart, my brain, and so on. But I also feel English is a very, very resonant language, and the other day I was reading in New York at a bar, KGB, and I was going up the stairs. There's some group of people who were about 7 or 8 people that were about to go up the stairs, and they asked me, "Is this where KGB is?" And I said, "Yeah." And I thought, "Oh my God, you're coming to the reading, right?" She said, "What reading?" "No, we're going to drink." And the fellow who was sort of the leader said, "Well, can you give us a taste of what you're reading?" And nothing of my own came up. But this poem by Robert Herrick, I blurted it out. When as in silks my Julia goes, how sweetly flows the liquefaction of her clothes. Next, when I cast mine eyes on that vibration, each way free, I'm not saying it exactly, oh, how that glittering taketh me. And I thought that would convince them to come and listen to me. I said, "Oh, thanks, you killed that one, but no, we're drinking." But Robert, you listen to Robert Herrick, you listen to Elizabeth Bishop, and these are just the poems just flow, So I have a very close and deep feeling for those poems. And in the same way that I have close and deep feelings for Neruda and Garcia Lorca and all the great poets of the Spanish language. I can't, each language has its own beauty, I suppose. Yes.
As a non-poet, forgive the naive if my question, but what's more difficult for you, writing your own poetry or working on translations of others?
Well, they offer different sorts of difficulty, as I'm sure you know. The difficulty of the poem, of one's own poetry, is that you have to face the blank page. You have to face you have to face the entry into the poem, the first line, and you have to follow that with something. So that's an initial difficulty if it's working on it. The difficulties of translation are myriad, but the one saving grace is that you have a text in front of you. You don't have to fill the page with nothing. You have something. It's just a matter of how to transfer it. And in order to do that, you have to figure out what the poet's initial intent is, and how best to render that in the new language. And that's oftentimes a very, very difficult and frustrating thing. And there are poets who are, for me, untranslatable. I've tried forever to translate the poetry of Borges, which I think is gloriously beautiful in Spanish. Not at all the intellectual that you see in his essays and his fictions and so on. But I can't do it. I just cannot do it because it's so, well, first of all, he writes formal verse for the most part. And so I just feel very, very frustrated by it, despite this. But I keep trying, and it's hard work. And I tried translating Sor Juana. I think I got one poem. I tried like 20 or 30. Only one poem worked. Again, for the same reasons. So, yes.
When you translated the Lorca, which I loved, I read that book years ago, and you make me want to read it again. Did you have existing translations in your head, or were you consulting them, or were you avoiding them?
It's funny because I don't have to read translations in Spanish. I can read the original, so I'm not very much aware. Mark had known the previous translations. There were a couple that were done over the years, and he read them. So we worked very well together because he had a sense of what other people had done. I really didn't, and so I was working more or less in this vacuum, but also very familiar with those poems, which, by the way, I'd heard. I mean, I'd heard some of the poems recited to me from when I was a kid, because Lorca was very much in the spirit of my family. They loved Lorca for reasons that are mysterious to me. But anyway, yes.
I just really want to thank you so much for two things. One is your work is so open and touching and metaphorical at the same time. To be deep and accessible at the same time, I think, is difficult. And I think you do that, and I just really appreciate it. And the second thing is that I so much appreciate your having read some of the works in Spanish and talking about Cuba. It was my pleasure to go to Cuba with some artists, and I'm a writer, but the others were painters and a photographer. And we went right after Obama had made it a little bit easier to go. And so we weren't followed that much. But I was able to go to the alley of, I don't remember the name, Salvador Escalona.
Yeah, right. I know.
Meet him, and I bought a painting of his.
Right.
It changed my life, really. He didn't speak English, as you probably know. I didn't speak Spanish. What I learned there and the books I bought there, had someone help translate.
Yeah, he's quite a character, isn't he?
He died not too long ago.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, to hear that again and to hear the accented Cuban Spanish that you had, even though I don't know the language, it's different.
Thank you.
I really, it opens worlds, and I appreciate it.
Good, thank you. You have.
I'm going to be silent almost after hearing that. One thing I'm thinking of is not long ago in Londonderry, I believe, in Lyndonville, if you were there, were sitting through a storm, which maybe wasn't too different than what you translated today.
Oh, the Rafael Alcides translation of a hurricane. It's essentially a very good description of a hurricane.
And we've been hearing about all the losses and the rivers overflowing, and I just think of you there translating about the hurricane that came to Vermont in a way.
Yeah. Do you mean Irene, or do you mean more recent storms? Yes, I've been here, and we live by the Rock River, so it's scary when that river rages.
Yeah.
So.
I just wonder if you thought about it as you were translating.
No, I was just following Alcides and his translation, which has to do with hurricanes which go through Cuba, as you know, very, very frequently. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, that has nothing to do with a hurricane. It has to do more with, no, I won't go there. Yes.
Hi, I'd just like to put another sort of twist on translations. I always think, I have so many Homers and Dantes, but I think of Ezra Pound, who was a translator, of course, but it would become a new work. It wouldn't be just a literal thing.
Right.
In fact, when he first started translating Chinese, he didn't know Chinese.
No.
So he was fabricating and creating all this stuff.
He had a crazy theory that you could actually, that Chinese was a pictorial language and that you can actually look at a Chinese character and decipher the pictures that were in the he did, but that theory has been debunked, by the way. But still,
The point being that he was never aiming for a literal
No.
It was a creation of a whole new work. If you look at it, a lot of like Dante or Homer, they're like reading different books in translation.
Yeah.
They can be so.
Right.
They're
But,
never
if
the
you
same.
haven't read Emily Wilson's translations of both the Odyssey and the Iliad, I recommend them highly because she has done a great job of rendering Homer or whoever his language. And she did it by, and this is interesting because I think this is what a lot of translators do. Instead of limiting herself to a dactylic hexameter, which was the rhyme, the meter rather, that Homer used, she translated into iambic pentameter, which is so much more familiar to English speakers even now in the 21st century. So her translations are very approachable at the same time that they're fairly literal. Yeah, she's quite something. Yeah.
I think you were all by Pablo's book.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.